I'd like to agree with you, but I can't.
Yorgos Panayotides is the Contrarian.
I always like it when people write well-thought-out articles about board games, especially when I don't agree with them, because that means I feel the urge to write something in response as opposed to simply retweeting and agreeing with what they've done. Such is the case with Michael Heron's game criticism and the myth of the objective game review, to be found on the Meeple Like Us website. Disagreement may be a bit strong, as I think a lot of his observations are on point and accurate. I just don't think that his conclusions match my own, and what better way to self-aggrandize to the level of an actual published academic than broadcasting my rambling thoughts on the matter. So here goes. Today, I reject your objectivity and substitute my own. Michael is of course entirely correct that a body of established criteria, academic work and analysis, or as he calls it, an intellectual framework within which to discuss media is incredibly useful and helpful. It's like the Force. It is all around us, it flows through us, it binds the galaxy together. In many cases, such a framework is downright necessary to even find your footing within an art form. You can't know what's what if you don't know what's been said about what. His comparison to film theory is apt, even if he thereby lays the groundwork for what ultimately contradicts his biggest claim, the impossibility of objectivity. So let's tackle that term, objectivity, an idea that is now generally thought of as a quaint, bourgeois superstition that learned people such as ourselves snicker at, roll their eyes over, and tut-tut as we move on to more advanced questions, such as, whose turn is it anyway? It is an idea that is assumed to be disproven by default, like horoscopes, mood rings, and hard work paying off. But I believe this myth of objectivity is born out of two distinct fallacies. First of all, the idea that the opposite of objectivity is subjectivity. It is an easy trap to fall into. After all, we quickly learn that sentences have subjects and objects on opposite ends. So it's easy to think that the opposite of subjectivity, dealing with perspective, must be objectivity. But in fact, when we talk about objectivity in terms of criticism and reviews, the opposite of objectivity is actually relativity. Objectivity is not about inhabiting a vantage point from which any and all judgment is impervious to criticism and beyond all reproach. Objectivity presupposes an external structure that exists independently of whether we agree with it or not. It implies that there are assertions, values, and in fact objects that do not vanish the moment we stop looking at them. See also Schrödinger's widely referenced thought experiment involving felines in a box. When gamers ask for objectivity, they do not ask for criticism and analysis that always leads to the same conclusion regardless of who is doing it. An objective review is not one in which the conclusion must be shared by any and all people, because it is the only possible way that a game can be evaluated. Instead, the desire for objective criticism is a desire for a way to criticize something based on an external set of values. In other words, criticizing a game not on personal preferences, but on qualities that are valuable. But all values are subjective, you might claim. All perspectives grow out of personal preference. We value things because we like them and not because they are actually good or bad. That guy that ripped off the Lion King said so himself. There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This is ultimately the issue at hand. The difficult to maneuver question of internal versus external, of self versus other. It is the Gordian knot of philosophy, for beginners. Do I like this because it is good, or do I think it's good because I like it? And as history has shown, us Greeks have a tendency to solve complex problems through the measured application of brute force. So I simply reject the distinction. It is irrelevant, at least to the review itself. A review doesn't need to argue, justify, or otherwise articulate the so-called objectivity of what it praises in a game. It does not need to claim objectivity, but it needs to show a certain earnest, even po-faced conviction in its own argument. Because a unique perspective is the whole point. Reviews that relativize their own argument by pointing out how others may disagree or how others may still enjoy something are self-defeating. This is not to chastise reviewers who do that. I've fallen into that trap myself often enough. This is a reminder that a good review offers well-argued evaluation from an individual perspective, as unique and as limited as it may be. Assuming that you can speak for all gamers isn't being objective. It's your arrogance running away with you. A good reviewer must speak in favor of what they believe to be true about a game, not how others may perceive it. And as a reviewer who hopefully grows, changes and refines their analytic skills over time, it makes sense to repeatedly and continuously question your bias, your values, and your ability to recognize excellent craftsmanship. What I'm saying is this: reviewers need to make sure that game recognize game. The second fallacy is a little more difficult to avoid as it seems so obviously true. Every group is different. Every player is different. They're all coming to the game with their individual perspective, their personal preconceptions, or even mood swings, so evaluating a game without knowing all the factors that go into a play is impossible. Therefore, an objective review, or even a non-relative review, is impossible. It all hinges on your group. This is a valid and absolutely accurate observation. It just happens to fuel the wrong conclusion. Games are, unlike any other medium we know, interactive. Games are codified procedures of play that we engage in to experience certain emotions. Maybe the gratification of closure because our strategy has led us to victory. Maybe the thrilling moments of tension as we take certain risks, or even the sublime moments of shared humanity as our empathy makes us connect with another player, or any other emotion playing a game may evoke. In that way, games aren't all that different from films. We are also gratified by the story concluding in a happy ending or an inevitably tragic one. We savor the excitement and tension as the plot hurtles towards another cliffhanger moment. We are touched when the humanity shown on the screen resembles our own. What makes games stand apart from films is that they are not static. They are not the same every time we hit play. The individual moments that make up the experience are not predetermined, but rely on player choice. Games are dynamic in the way films are not. This is essential to their DNA. It's the reason why a game that is solvable is arguably dead. If it cannot change, if it cannot be different next time, why play it at all? This naturally gives players a tremendous power over how a game plays. And since a reviewer cannot account for all possible variations of players in all possible combinations in a group, how can there be an objective criticism of a game? It seems to me that the realization of the group's influence over the experience has made us shy away from giving credence to the effectiveness of a well-made game. But again, if we look at film, we'll note that a good script always shines through, even through a shoddy production. The same is true of a good game. It will always shine through, even with shoddy players. Even if the experience is excruciatingly dull or frustrating, a good game simply works. It lays the groundwork for a specific experience, and everything in it is set to support that experience. Whether you and your group can take advantage of that shouldn't matter to a reviewer. Their focus has to be on the game and not on how well a group plays it. To return to the film analogy, we're not reviewing the finished film or even the experience of shooting that film ourselves. We are looking at the script. And while it might make a big difference whether the lead role is played by Daniel Day-Lewis or Steven Seagal, it doesn't change the quality of what we're actually reviewing. So where does all that rambling leave us with regards to objectivity in game reviews? I would argue it is mostly a semantic disagreement, as opposed to one of ideas. There is no objectivity in the sense of universal holistic truths. There is no, this game is the best and all will love it. There is no objectivity in the sense of accounting for all possible variations and all possible combinations. No, this game will always be fun and enjoyable. But there is a sense of objectivity in trying to consistently apply your own critical standards to a game. A sense of objectivity in reviewing the object that you are talking about, i.e. the game, and not how subjects used it, i.e. your playthroughs. A distinction that I am aware is not always easy to make, and I'm sure I've failed far too often, but it is an important one. A review shouldn't just be about equating your play experience with a game's design. It should be about the interplay between the two. How does one influence the other? And is that in line with what the game sets out to be? And if you want, is what the game sets out to be actually worthwhile?